Filmmaker in Focus is a project of the Maine Outdoor Film Festival, a celebration of adventure, conservation, and the arts, held each summer in Portland, Maine.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Filmmaker in Focus. I'm Maddie Roy and today we're going to be discussing a documentary called CRUX. It's by Zach Hoffman and Casey Dubois, Canadian filmmakers, and they are documenting a man named Harvey who is struggling with mental health issues and copes with them through rock climbing. Let's have a look at the trailer.
For me, mental health and climbing go hand in hand. It's scary and it's hard and I don't like it all the time, you know? And so is life. As a teenager, I started getting into music and DJing and really found a passion in that and the energy of going to parties. I started to go really deep into a depression. I had just killed off so much of a part of me inside that cared, that wanted me to live. But I started just seeing climbing films on the internet. The more I did it, the more I just realized this potential and this quality inside me.
It's a release of dopamine and serotonin and endorphins, adrenaline, all of those chemicals our brain is addicted to.
It's giving ourselves permission to express how that makes us feel and turn toward that fragility. Climbing allows us to do that.
No! No! It's been 5 weeks in quarantine since life changed. I feel like it's gonna be okay. This isn't gonna last forever.
And that was a look at this incredible film, CRUX. Today we have the filmmakers here, Zach Hoffman and Casey Dubois, to have an interview with me. Guys, thank you so much for coming in. I'm very excited to speak with you about this movie. How are you guys doing today?
Very good, yeah, I'd say so. It's been quite an eventful summer so far, and yeah, we're just excited to be going outside and having things ease off a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zach, you actually started your career as a skier, is that correct?
Yeah. I was a competitive skier from maybe age of 10 to 24. And when I was maybe around 13, 14, I was getting really hooked on ski films and started to realize that that was another sort of outlet I could have is not just skiing, but filming my friends ski and putting together little videos, and that eventually blossomed into a love for just filmmaking as a whole. And now I'm not just making ski films anymore, which has been fun to branch out.
Yeah, I bet. And Casey, you were not a filmmaker to begin with either, right? You were an actor for a really long time.
I don't know who told you that, but yeah, that's the truth. Most of my life, essentially, I was an actor, and so being in front of the camera, but it was maybe 5 years ago when I decided to buy a camera and learn everything about them, just kind of DIY. And
What
now,
spurred that, making you like want to branch out?
yeah, it was a fact of, you know, the love for the outdoor sports, and actually going to a lot of like mountain film festivals and just film festivals in general, and seeing the creativity in documentary filmmaking and just these compelling stories in which you can actually just, I don't know, see real life. And
Yeah.
I had to get myself around that sort of thing, but behind the camera.
Seems like a perfect partnership. How long have you guys known each other?
How long has it been?
I think we've known each other about 4 years. I lived in Ontario, and I moved out here to, I say to start film school, but really I moved here for the mountains. There just happened to be a good film school here as well. And we had a mutual friend here, so we met within a couple months of me being here, I think. So yeah, about I'd say about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And we knew each other for about a year before we started working on films together.
That's really great. So let's talk about Crux. What drew you guys to Harvey's story?
Well, it was kind of, I've been good friends with him for about the same amount of time that I've known Zach. We were working at the Patagonia store in Vancouver, and I knew he was a very interesting person, but I didn't really ever think of, making a film about him. Maybe that was just my own trepidation of my own self-worth, but it was a friend of ours that essentially kind of gave the idea to Zach, just because Zach was looking for a new project, and he was figuring out what he could do that was more of a personal project. And then when this idea got brought up to him, he's like, oh, this is pretty solid. And then he's like, well, I need a climber to do this story. And that's where he's like, well, I know that Casey's looking for something as well. And that's how this kind of partnership with us started. And once the story kind of was brought to me, I was like, why didn't I think of this earlier? And after our first interview, we thought, initially it was going to be a 10-minute piece, and quickly that changed our minds just after having one interview with him. He's just a very interesting person.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to squeeze all of that into 10 minutes. There's a lot of complexities there. He's quite a guy. So was it hard for you at certain points to carry on making this film when Harvey was struggling, especially, and did you consider at any point even stopping altogether?
Yeah, I would say it was a constant conversation of the ethics of it and whether or not it was the right thing to be doing to be making this film. We had definitely chatted a lot about whether or not having this film was putting pressure on him, and that was maybe a negative thing. But we were lucky in the sense that, as you can see in the film, Harvey is an incredibly open person, and that's not just on camera, that's him. And we would just talk with him about this stuff and make sure he was still on board. And I think he realized, he was pretty self-aware that even though he was struggling, these struggles on camera were something that could make a huge impact on people, and he was willing to push through, and we just sort of took it one step at a time, and we were able to get it done. But it was very challenging at times, physically and emotionally.
Yeah, I bet. You talk about the ethics of the film. Is there a specific message that you wanted viewers to take away from this, or that you have found even afterwards that revealed itself?
I think from the get-go, we had this idea of making, it was a climbing film, but it's a story about mental health, or it's a film about mental health really, but there's climbing involved. And from this idea that climbing can help with mental health, which is true to an extent, but also just being able to share and promoting vulnerability. That's kind of a big message for us, because in the end, hiding things down or not being willing to kind of share what you're really feeling and bottling that up, that's not ideal either, because we tended to even notice that when we weren't hearing as much from Harvey, that's when we needed to reach out to him a little bit more to see how he's really doing. And that goes without saying to pretty much everyone I know, including myself. And so that's something that we really wanted to try and promote at the end of this, and even at the very start, but it just became all the more evident as the film kept moving on.
Wow. What has the response been so far to those that you've shown it to?
It's been kind of overwhelmingly positive. There's a lot in this film that, was nerve-wracking to put together, and you never know how people are going to receive things. But we just tried our absolute hardest to just be honest and keep the film as raw as we can, so that we weren't manipulating anything to try and present our ideas on mental health or our ideas on how people should be. We were just, this is Harvey's story. We're just going to tell it as raw and real as we can. And I think because of that, people have responded well to it, and people seem to be able to relate to it in many ways and connect to it, especially because this was shot through the pandemic. A lot of people are struggling with this stuff, and people that were stuck in their homes for extended periods of time by themselves, it's hard for anybody. So I think it just became very relatable, and that's why it seems to be getting some pretty good recognition so far.
Yeah, it was definitely shocking at some points. I really did appreciate the fact that Harvey was even documenting himself, being alone, and that was extremely powerful. Do you think that the way that society and specifically the American healthcare system and everything, do you think that the way people treat people with addiction, that the system has failed people like Harvey? And what do you think people who are struggling with dependence issues need in watching this struggle yourselves?
It's a very good question.
That is good.
That's good one. It's really loaded, because in the end, I think you the idea that we have and the negative connotation that we put towards addiction and towards mental health, depression, so on and so forth, even anxiety, we pass a lot of these things by as if they're, you can shrug them off, or it's really hard to empathize with someone who has depression if you've never felt it. It's really hard to empathize with what crippling anxiety does without having actually gone through it. And same with addiction. And without actually going through those things and understanding them, a lot of people aren't really going to have the same understanding until it's really hitting them hard, or it's hitting a family member of theirs so intensely, or a best friend in this instance. And I'm not saying that's a blanket statement with everybody, that's how everyone's going to feel. But then when you speak of, the healthcare system, we're in Canada here, but I don't think it's too much different, where in the end, we have all these different means to be able to get good health care in certain senses, or even in private health care, extended benefits, but still somehow counseling and therapy and all these different things are still kind of shoved under the rug and kind of looked past way too often. And again, that's not to say that that's the entire system, and that's not everybody that looks like this, not every psychologist, psychiatrist, but at the same time, there's just too often than not, it's just overlooked, and it's not completely understood, or it's okay if you can't feel empathy, but to have some sort of sympathy and trying to understand and being willing to understand, that's a huge step.
Yeah, I think you're what you're saying, it's a visibility issue, a lot of it. It's hard. I think we're getting better in society. I think people are starting to understand it more, but it's really easy to go in for medical care when your arm is snapped, because that's okay, something's wrong with your arm, go fix it. But it's hard for people to understand when mentally there is a problem that you can't put your finger on what it is, and it can be much more complex and complicated. So I do think we're moving in the right direction, where the stigma behind mental health is definitely fading, and we're starting to see that the message of it's okay to struggle with mental health. You don't have to hide it from the world. It's that is part of life. Just like you get sick and you have stomach aches, you get sick in a mental way. But there's a long way to go. I think we're just starting, and it's nice to see, but for sure there's a long way to go before it's fully accepted and understood.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely, with physical illnesses, people believe you right away and they want to help you right away. And with mental illnesses, it can be categorized as your fault, or like, oh, well, I'm sure it's just your environment. And I'm sure people like Harvey have dealt with a world who sometimes just discards them as like, oh, well, he's probably like a hopeless case. When he was at his lowest moments in the film, he felt like nobody cared about him. But then when people like that are able to get treatment, a lot of times, like we saw in this film, the things that he could accomplish when he was at his best, like he really was incredible. And yeah, so I think that this is definitely a testament to how like working on your mental health can make an actual difference, and it is something that can change a person's entire life. What were some of the most like inspirational or some of your favorite moments during filming this?
I feel like you've got an answer to start.
I mean, there's one moment, I don't want to give it away too much, but it was emotional for both him and myself. We ended up doing a big trip together. I'm not going to say where yet. I mean, depends on whether or not this is before or after. But yeah, we went on a big trip, and there was something that he really wanted to make happen, and we both did together. And there was a certain moment right before the start of the route where, you know, all these emotions just kind of came full circle, where he had seen where he was, you know, a few months before and where he was in that moment, and just this single tear falling just was like, oh yeah, I still remember that moment, like, you know, holding the camera and then also just kind of seeing it with my own eyes and feeling that same thing of elation with him. I mean, there's lots of moments in the end, though. You know, we both grew really close to this story, and you know, through editing itself, you're watching this thing over and over and over, and you're still feeling the same goosebumps when it's over. So yeah, that's one specific, but that's it's definitely yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, probably the most, like, there's a lot of moments where I was pretty blown away through making this, for sure. But I think if I had to pick the moment where I felt most inspired, it was the first interview we did that Casey, I think, had mentioned prior. It was, you know, he's this like big, almost intimidating looking like rock star, badass character. And he opens his mouth and he speaks in poetry, and he's like incredibly humble and kind, and like just so ridiculously vulnerable. It blew me away what he was willing to share to someone like me who he'd literally met 15 minutes prior.
Right.
And that was just like kind of made me take a step back and was like, whoa, this is, you know, because I've like definitely been someone who doesn't share everything. I do tend to bottle things up, and like through my time as a competitive skier, like I shied away from sports psychology, and I didn't want to share with people how I was feeling with that kind of thing. But getting to just hear Harvey really open up to a complete stranger about all of these really intense things in his life, and depression and mental health, was super inspiring. And like Casey said, that was the moment where we kind of turned to each other and said, okay, we've got something a lot bigger than we thought we did.
Yeah. This film is incredible. It made me cry twice during it. I really appreciate you guys speaking with me about it. We are going to show this interview after the film festival, so people will luckily have had a chance to watch it, and if they haven't, they should probably definitely watch it. And then are there any screenings that you want us to advertise that are coming up after the festival?
Oh, I mean, we've got a few in Vancouver in Canada here. You know, one specific one, which is August 13th. The nonprofit organization one of the nonprofit organizations that we partnered with, Worth Hats. Yeah, those wonderful hats, which help in turn to give counseling to those in need. They're doing an event. It's August 13th, 7:30 p.m. with our screening, and it's a by donation event. And yeah, so that would definitely be something that you know, if anybody's in Vancouver, please come. Yeah, we'd love to have you there. And there's a few other screenings as well. One in Squamish at the end of August with the Arc'teryx Academy. and yeah, it would be amazing.
Yeah, and then we're just waiting to hear on some more festivals through the fall here, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.